Okay, so chapter 5 is about civil rights. Let me explain. Last week was civil liberties. The difference between civil liberties and civil rights. Civil liberties are referring to limiting the government's power to intrude upon what we refer to as your natural rights that you were born with. And those rights include, as we talked about, First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and also the rights of the accused, and so on. Okay, those are your individual liberties. Civil rights is referring to issues regarding equality. So this would refer to, of course, the most famous civil rights movement would be that for African Americans, but it would also extend to Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, women, the feminist movement, the LGBT movement, and those are all civil rights movements because they all have one thing in common: they're working towards being recognized as equal and equality, okay? And so the chapter begins by talking about the roots of American civil rights. And this is really important. It's a bit of a history lesson. Our roots to the American civil rights movement really go back when the country was founded, because we are founded in unequal footing. And there are some politicians that don't want me to say that today, but it is so true, and you're just denying the history if you don't recognize that people were brought here primarily from Africa, and they were bought and sold and enslaved. How is that justified? How can you take human beings and buy them and sell them? There has to be a rationalization, because they knew it's like, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. And the only way you can rationalize it is to say, oh, well, we can do it because they are not human because of their skin color. And if they're this skin color, then they're like animals, and we can buy and we can sell them. And that is it is in the Constitution, they're only 3/5 of a person. They're not really a full person. And so it's in there until the Civil War is fought. And the Civil War is fought, slavery is supposed to be ended by the 13th Amendment. In a way, it's not. And then the African Americans are supposed to be granted equal protection under the law under the 14th Amendment. And then the Supreme Court comes along and says, oh, no, it's separate but equal, which of course is a bunch of baloney, because if you separate people, you are inherently saying they're not equal. There must be something unequal about them. Otherwise, why would you separate them in the first place? So this is the dark, terrible history of our country that had led to, yes, systemic inequality today. And that's, again, a big debate when we talk about civil liberties. And I just want to get this out there right now, because there are people that will say that we have an equal society now. And I think what they're talking about, equality of opportunity, and everyone has the same opportunity, and there's not what's called systemic inequality. And what they'll say is, oh, you have instances where George Floyd, and you get a bad cop that will do terrible things, but the whole system is not unequal. The system now, we've ended that, and that's just denial, because there is systemic inequality, and let me explain. If you believe that there's not systemic inequality, let's look at the prison system. And far more minorities, especially African Americans, but other minorities as well, are in prison at a far higher rate than white or Caucasian. Okay, why is that? And there's really one of two answers. Either there's systemic inequality that's leading to their imprisonment, whether from the time they're born, if they have greater exposure, maybe parents that are using drugs, they don't have access to better education and everything, which is all systemic. The whole system is set up against them. And so that system is leading them to that. And again, and you need to know, the vast majority of minorities, African Americans, Hispanic, and Asian Americans, do very well. But there's more minorities in prison than in than there are Caucasians, or what we refer to as European ancestry. So, okay, if it's not the system, why is it that there's more minorities in prison? The only other alternative answer is there's something inherently, if there's no systemic racism, then there must be something inherently wrong with them that's criminal. That just genetically, they're more likely, more predisposed to criminality, which is one of the most racist things you could believe. I mean, those are your two choices. So I think we can drop this idea that we don't have systemic racism in this country today. So the battle goes on and continues on. And so what this chapter talks about is the history of that. And very little progress is even made after the Civil War. You get early civil rights leaders, you learn about that in history classes, and finally, after World War II, they get moving on it. And part of that was because of World War II. We were fighting against Hitler, who's the biggest racist in history, and then we come back and we have to confront ourselves in the mirror and say, wait a second, we're doing much of the same thing that Hitler did. In fact, Hitler looked to American segregation law as an example for how to segregate Jews in Germany. So where can I find laws that will segregate people so we can get rid of the Jews and get them away from us? And then he goes towards genocide. He looks to America because we had that too. So we had to take a hard, long look at ourselves. I could tell you another story. I have a book here somewhere. Unexampled Courage, The Blinding of Sergeant Woodard and the Awakening of the American President. This is about Isaac Woodard. He was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. He comes home. He's on a bus. He and his fellow soldiers are laughing and get along, and they're black and white. And they're just so happy because they've been overseas and they're finally coming home after years of being gone. But the bus driver is mad. He's mad because he's wearing a uniform, and a black person in a uniform, well, that means he demands respect, right? And then whites and blacks carrying on like that together is violating every social norm. So the white bus driver pulls the bus over, contacts the authorities. The sheriff comes and he arrests Isaac Woodard. And the next morning, Isaac Woodard is blind and beaten. He is blinded because the officer, the sheriff, had taken the baton and he had put the baton in his eyes and gouged his eyes out. And then he said he resisted, which, okay, he resisted. Okay, if somebody's resisting, of course, their eyes are not gouged out. This was shocking to the country, and it led to Harry Truman integrating the military, which he did very courageously and at great cost to himself politically, because he would end up losing the South in the next presidential election because they were so angry that he integrated the military. Of course, you know about the more famous things, I hope, about Brown versus Board of Education, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, the Freedom Rides. All of these are in an effort to create a more equal society and guarantee civil liberties. But civil liberties then, on the heels of the African American movement, would come the feminist movement. Because even within the African American movement, women were often excluded from leadership roles. And so while they're going through that, they're like, wait a second, we're being treated the same way that they're fighting against. And that we're second-class citizens too. So a big part of civil liberties is the feminist movement, which is really important as well. Because I do believe, I am a feminist. A feminist is someone who believes that men and women are equal. And by equal, I mean equal under eyes of the law and should have the same opportunity. I don't think that's a radical concept, but for some people it is. More recently, of course, we have seen other movements for Latinos, of course, American Indians and Asians, and then the most recent has been the LGBT. All right, I got 15 seconds left. So, I can't go over all of the civil rights movement. There's so many, and they're so important. Every one of them are important. So for your assignment this week, I'm gonna have you choose one and choose something that interests you. I've got different videos. You pick one, watch it, and write a reflective essay about it. Because one of the most important things, and I'll leave you with this, to understanding civil rights, and most important thing for being a good citizen, is empathy. If you can't put yourself in someone else's shoes, you lack that empathy, then it's hard to be a good citizen. It's hard to understand this. And so you hear people say racist things, or they say homophobic things. So I ask you to understand the civil rights movement. Put yourself in their position. My experience is that some people just are impossible to do that. And they're always going to say, what about me? What about me? You know, they're on my rights and stuff like that. Put yourself in their position. Everybody deserves a right to equal treatment, whether they're transgender or gay or lesbian, a woman, or black or Hispanic. They deserve that. And we're still working towards it. And we still have a long way to go. Don't think this is in the past. We're still working towards it. So thanks for listening. Good luck. I hope you get a lot out of this chapter. It's an important one.